So we were on a vacation in Hawaii. My grandma lives there. So we were visiting her and we were just playing at the beach, beach day. And I think a wave must have come up from behind me or something, but all of a sudden I was just underwater. And I remember just being tossed and turned in the waves, and I can still see the golden sand speckles and the foam and the blue water just churning over me, and the struggle of trying to breathe and the fear of not being able to, and the ache of my lungs with the lack of oxygen, and thinking,
this is it.
I'm gonna die. I'm 8 years old.
Wow.
And I remember that, and then all of a sudden I was on shore, washed up. So I'm on my hands and knees somehow on the shore, and I just crawl up the beach, sandy hair everywhere, just soaking wet. And my grandma was up on the beach a little bit. Everybody else is playing all around, And I crawl up and I look at my grandma, and she just looks at me and smiles, and then goes back to looking at everybody else. And I just sat down, I wrapped myself in a towel, and I remember sitting there thinking, I almost died, and nobody noticed.
And everybody.
That is how I feel for the wives of porn addicts. You're in this thing, you feel like you're gonna die, and nobody even notices. Nobody knows. But I know. Yeah. I know how it feels. It made me feel like I had a pointless role as a wife. I should have just been a hired servant, because then at least I'd get paid. I want to have this relationship with my husband, but he's busy looking at porn and masturbating in the bathroom. So why am I even here? Do I go and have sex with my husband and just feel used like an object, like a piece of trash, when he can go do it by himself? But I don't want him to do it by himself.
You were trying to control everything that you could control.
Right, because I couldn't control him and his
okay.
addiction. I had no control over that. So it was okay, what can I control? My house, my kids. So I would answer for him before he got to it, as a way to protect my children from having a dad who's always putting them down with his tone, I couldn't hold his hand just because I wanted to hold his hand. It was oh, she's holding my hand because she wants sex, so let's go have sex. And that's not what I wanted. A lot of times when it was a pornography issue, I didn't want him to even touch me. He's been looking at all these other women, and that makes me feel like trash.
Yeah.
What are you looking at those women doing? And I'm never going to compare to that. I'm never going to do that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And so even just to have him touch me at times, I couldn't handle it. We moved to Seattle. So he got accepted to grad school at UW in Seattle, and we moved there. We didn't have any family around, so we were really on our own. We were in this horrible little apartment that was dank and dingy, and our landlords were awful. There was this change that came over where he just got darker. The light went out of his eyes, and he just seemed to hate being home with me and the kids. He spent a lot of time at the studio, which is a master, so you expect him to be gone all the time. And one day he came home, and they had a computer lab in the studio where he was at. And it's a small lab, not very many students, so it wasn't really used. And he came home and just said, I need to keep the door to the computer lab open because it's just too tempting. And then from a comment like that, I was just okay, so I can tell he's been looking at pornography again. But he left it at that. And so I was well, maybe it's just not that much. There were times when he was as true as he could be, but he did leave some things out. And I found out about
to protect
that later.
you?
No, because he was scared. Okay. It was to protect himself. Okay. That comment about the leaving the computer lab door open, it wasn't until we moved here years later where I found out that he was spending hours at a time in that computer lab looking at pornography and acting out in the computer lab in a public space. But one night, we're kind of struggling. I'm by myself, single mom, 2 young kids, and he's dealing with the stresses of grad school. And when I was really tired, but he was working on the computer, and I just had this feeling I should stay awake, something's gonna happen on the computer. But I was really tired, and I just went to bed. 20 minutes after I fell asleep, he came in and woke me up and was hey, I just got into this stuff on the computer, and I'm really sorry, and I just had to let you know. And I was just like, what? You know, just like brain fog coming out of my sleep. And so he told me, you know, like all this pornography stuff. At that point, I just kind of broke down. Like, I wasn't the supportive wife anymore. I was mad. I was so mad that through all this time, like, he'd still been going back and back and back. I just sat there in bed crying, and he just sat there watching me, you know, like, well, what do we do? So finally he's like, well, what do you want to do? I was just like, I want to punch you in the face. And you know, like, I'm not violent like that, you know, and he was just like, okay, do it. And right then something clicked in my brain, and I stopped crying, and I was like, I'm not going to punch you in the face because you want me to. And if I punch you in the face, you're going to think that you have, like, paid your dues. Like, there's the consequence, bam, and be done. And that's not what I want. So I didn't do anything. I just went back to bed.
Wow.
One night we were having one of those big conversations where I was just like, look, did you do this? You know, and he had said that he wandered into some chat rooms many times, and the only thing that kept him from not like interacting online was because you had to pay. So they'd get his information. They get it wasn't even the money. It was that they would get his name and email and like all this stuff. Yeah. And so people would like be able to link him, and that's what his worry was. And that really broke me at that point. When he proposed to me, my dad took him on a 45-minute walk and was like, divorce is not an option. You know, you work through your stuff. And so I think he always had that in the back of his mind, like, oh, she'll never divorce me, because that's what her dad said. I know that my dad would not want me to stay in a relationship that hurt me, either physically or emotionally, mentally, whatever. I know my dad would not put up with that. I mentioned, I was like, look, I've thought about divorce before, and if you ever have like a sexual interaction encounter with another woman, I think I'll be gone. And that really hurt him, because it was the first time that he realized that I would just pack up and leave. I think a couple of days after that conversation we had, I was lying next to my husband in bed, just having a really hard time dealing with all of the addiction and the things that he had told me a couple days earlier. And I was lying there, and for a split second, I felt what my husband feels, what Bob felt. I felt the self-loathing. I felt the hate, the guilt, what it's like to be addicted. You know, like, I really felt like Heavenly Father gave me this vision of what it is like to be God, and how Christ sees Bob in a fraction of a second. And it was only for a fraction of a second, because I don't think I would have been able to handle anymore. Me being who I am, feeling who he was at the time, it was heartbreaking for me. Like, my heart had been breaking anyway because of what he was doing to me.
But then all of a sudden, once you feel what he's felt towards himself, it almost opens up these
it did. My heart,
floodgates of compassion.
My heart broke for him at that point. And you know, I just laid there and sobbed, and you know, that was really the point in our marriage where I decided to stay and to work through it, because I actually felt him, like who he was down at his core. I really love my husband, and we had this, you know how like you talk with your husband, you're like, what's your greatest fear? You know, my greatest fear is drowning. You know, I almost drowned when I was 8, and like, it's just drowning. But in the middle of all this addiction, I had this realization that my actual biggest fear would have been that I would have to leave him and take the kids with me, and that he would want me to come back and I wouldn't be able to do it. So, you know, I loved him through the whole process. I hated what he was doing, and I hated what he was doing to me and our family. But I loved who he was, and he was trying to be a good man. Nobody ever tries to, well, I mean, some people try. He wasn't trying to like stay in porn and do this, but like it's an addiction. Like it just takes over, and you can't get out without help. And so like while we were trying to figure this out, I just really loved my husband, and I hated everything else, what he was doing, what he was looking at. But that little snippet of a vision, you know, it wasn't even a second. I wouldn't have been able to handle a full second of what he felt like. Really helped me to understand him and see him how Christ sees him, and love him how Christ loves him. Yeah. And that was a big turning point. If you have building blocks and you're building this huge tower that's as tall as you are, it takes 1 second to knock it down.
And a while to build it back.
But it takes a whole lot longer to build it back up.
That's a great analogy.
And so, you know, like, there was a point where he was just like, are you ever going to be able to trust me again? And I told him, I trust you with my life. I really do. I trust you with my life. I do not trust you with a computer. Forgiveness and trust are two different things.
True.
So I was able to forgive him again and again and again, but like forgive him a lot faster than I was able to trust him. Building back the trust and getting back our relation back on track. Sometimes I would just have random like flashback anger. One day, 1 hour, like nothing triggers it. I just like get super angry at him because of what he did. Men are wondering, why don't you trust me? It's because you've shown me in the past that I can't trust you.
Then you just shouted at someone.
And then I trusted you, and then you knocked back down. It took a long time. It was baby steps building up, and it took having a lot of conversations, a lot of safe space, you know, to even trust him, where intimacy wasn't this weird thing for me, where I wasn't like, oh, is he thinking about somebody else, or why is he wanting this, you know? It was just where it could just be like, we love each other, and we're here. Up until that point, everything Bob had tried to do was still like in the name of anonymity. Like he didn't want anybody to know but me. I was the only one that knew. So when I asked him to go to these meetings, I was so scared he was going to say no, but he said yes. And then like I spent the next week just praying that he would have the courage to drive there, and then to get out of the car and not just sit in the parking lot for that whole hour and like get in. And he did, and he, you know, I was just on pins and needles for the whole time he was gone. And he came back and he just said it was the best experience to be able to finally
take that first step.
Take that first step. So the addiction recovery programs, we feel like it is a great starting space.
Right.
It's a great place to start. They've got some really good things.
But you have
Bob's
to go
figured out some other stuff to be able to continue and to move on and to put your husband back into a place of power instead of being a victim all the time, you know, from the addiction. Like he's figured out some things through all of this training that he spent years and years doing. And at the time I was just like, oh, it's another thing that he's gonna go spend money on. Everything he tried, he's found bits and pieces to help
put together his own
really get the men back on their feet, instead of like overcoming it and then maybe backsliding, you know, 6 months, a year later. That was the old Bob. He's not even the same person anymore. He has changed so much. Even the way he looks, the way he carries himself. So like when we were in Seattle, he was getting his master's in fine arts and painting and drawing, and he did some self-portraits at like 2 o'clock in the morning, probably right after he had been on porn. And he would go in the bathroom and he did some sketches, and I hate those pictures.
Wow.
I cannot look at those pictures.
Wow.
Because I see it in his sketches. I can see the addiction, I can see the darkness, I can see the hate and the anger. And he is completely different now.
That's
like it's a different person. He stands up straighter, you know, he's not like always slumped or carrying this huge weight, his you know, chin up.
That's awesome.
It's amazing. Bob has spent years through through our marriage and through the addiction, trying to find different ways to help himself. But like the result of that was he gathered all these different ways of healing from the addiction. Not like managing, but healing. It's been awesome. You know, it's like he takes care of the kids more. He just brought me this flower. We have pretty open communication, which was something that was really hard for me to learn. Intimacy with my husband is a safe place now. I don't feel pressured. I don't feel used. It really has become a place where we can come together and just be together and love each other and even learn new things, you know, but it is a safe place. Bob has become the leader of our family. I don't feel like I have to drag him along with everybody else and pick up the pieces and hold everything together. Bob is the leader of the family, and I love that. It's really important to me to do this because I've been there. I know what it's like to be the wife of a porn addict. But now I know what it's like to be the wife of someone who's not addicted to porn. And that is just amazing. If you have any questions, you know, get a hold of us. We'd be love to answer them for you and see if we can help. See if we can help get you and your family past the addiction so that it's no longer even there.